Now let's look at how profiles are created and configured. But before we continue, look under this video, there's a link. This is a link to our Telegram channel. And in the Telegram channel, you'll find useful information about ZennoBrowser, ZennoPoster, and automation. Then come back to this video and we'll continue. So, to create a profile, we click the New Profile button. Here we can specify the name of our profile. Here you can specify a preset. What is a preset? It's a pre-configuration for the profile. We can preload extensions that will be used in the profile, bookmarks, and so on. The functionality of presets is gradually expanding, and we'll talk about them a little later. Next, here we can specify the folder where we want to place our profile. Folders are created here. See, we can create a folder, new folder 1. And then we create the profile, and here we can specify this folder. Or we can select the local folder, which is the general folder where all profiles are stored by default. Or we specify the folder we created. Here we specify the folder, for example, new folder 1. Here we can add tags, we can add notes, proxy. We can create a profile without a proxy, or we can specify a new proxy that will be used in the profile. Here we set the proxy name. Or again, we can create a list of some kind, where the proxy will be placed after it's added in this section. Here, the proxies will be saved either locally or in the cloud. Next, the proxy is specified here. We've already gone over the supported formats earlier. Here you can specify a link to change the IP address if we're using a mobile proxy. And we can also specify a proxy from a list. If we've preloaded some proxies into a list, we can select that proxy here. For example, a local proxy, and here we select this proxy. Or we select a cloud proxy and also specify our cloud proxy here. Next, here we can also load cookies. Cookies are loaded in JSON format. You select a text file and add it by clicking this button. Next, here we select the operating system. Currently, there's support for Windows, and support for macOS will be added a bit later, and a bit later mobile devices will be added. And here we can open the advanced settings. Okay, here I'll select some proxy. At this stage we can create the profile, and a profile will be generated with its own unique digital fingerprints, and you can start working with this profile. But we'll open the advanced settings, and here we can manually specify the parameters based on which our browser's digital fingerprints will be generated. So, screen. Here we can set the parameters based on which the characteristics of our screen will be generated. We can either set it to auto, meaning some random characteristics will be generated, but only existing characteristics will be generated. It won't happen that characteristics for a non-existent screen are generated. This principle of generating parameters only for existing devices applies to all the settings you see here. Processor. Here we set what processor characteristics will be generated. They can be generated automatically, or the real processor characteristics can be used, or we can set them manually here. RAM. The amount of RAM is also set here. This parameter, such as RAM, the processor, and other similar specifications, all of these are things that websites can actually see and access. When we set the option to auto, only random, already existing parameters will be generated for use. Language. Here we set the language that will be used in the profile. For example, if we set it to auto, some random languages will be generated. For example, if we've set it to German, then when visiting certain sites, the site will serve a page, the content of that page, in the German language. If we set English, the language will be English. If Russian, then Russian. In the future, a bit later, there will be support for over 30 languages. Which language is best to choose? That's for you to decide. But personally, I set the language that matches the proxy I'm using. For example, if my proxy is in Germany, I select the German language. If my proxies are Russian, I select the Russian language. Geolocation. If we set it to auto, a geolocation, our location, a point on the map, will be generated based on the proxy we're using. We can generate the geolocation automatically or set it manually. Time zone. If we've selected auto mode, it will be generated automatically based on the proxy we're using. WebGL and WebGPU. These parameters are responsible for the system's graphical characteristics. WebRTC. With this technology, resources can determine our real IP address if we're using a proxy. If you're not using a proxy, you set it to real. But if you are using a proxy, you set it to either emulate or hide. When we set it to emulate, WebRTC parameters will be generated based on the proxy we're using. However, even if we choose the emulate option, some resources can still determine our computer's real IP address, even when we're using a proxy. For example, if we're using a large number of accounts, and each account has its own proxy, the resource sees that the IP address seems different, but in reality, the real IP address is the same. And this can lead to our accounts getting blocked, for instance. So, if you're running into any blocks while you have emulate mode selected, try choosing hide mode. This mode completely hides the IP address leak, but the resource will see that the IP address is being hidden. Next up is Canvas. Canvas is responsible for the device's graphical fingerprint. What should you choose here? By default, I always select noise. But there are situations where, for example, I'm registering accounts on a social network, and with noise selected, the registrations fail. The reason is that some resources already know which Canvas fingerprints exist and which ones don't. So, if you've selected noise mode and you're running into problems where registrations on sites are failing, try setting it to real. Client recs. Services can also identify us based on this fingerprint. Media. This includes the camera, microphone, and speakers. Resources can see what hardware we're using. And to spoof the media devices, we can set it to auto, where media devices will be generated automatically, or we can set it to real, or set them manually. Here we can see the profile that's being generated. The screen resolution that will be used in the profile, the processor, RAM, language, geolocation, and so on. We can regenerate it if we're not happy with something. After that, we click Add Profile, and the profile will appear. We specified the folder where the profile will be moved after creation, New Folder 1, and then the profile can be launched. And here we can visit websites, perform various actions, register on social networks, and so on. And to stop the profile, we either close it or click Stop right here. We can also create several profiles at once. Add Profile, Bulk Creation. Here we set the number of profiles we want to be generated, for example 10. We specify the folder, tags. And here we assign proxies to the profiles that will be generated. We can either select a specific proxy or assign a list. In this case, we can specify the number of profiles per proxy. For example, if we have 10 proxies and we're generating 10 profiles, then each profile will be assigned its own unique proxy, so there will be no repetitions. But if we have, for example, 20 profiles and only 10 proxies, then proxies will only be assigned to 10 profiles, and the remaining 10 profiles will be without a proxy. Here we specify local proxies or cloud proxies and click Add Profile. We can also customize the workspace. We have this icon here, we click on it, and here we can set which fields to display in the workspace and which not to. For example, let's hide the tags we save there, and our tags are hidden. We can also edit profiles. For example, if we want to change a profile's name, we hover the mouse over the pencil icon, click on it, and set our own name here. We can change the profile settings. We move the mouse to this spot. There are 3 dots here, and click Edit. Here we can again change the name, the profile parameters, and so on. Also in this menu we have the profile ID. For example, if we want to quickly search for a profile we need, we can save the profile ID somewhere. Now let's copy it and enter it into the search field. We found the profile by its ID, and if we need to delete a profile, we click on this menu and select Delete. We can export cookies, we can move the profile to some folder. We can bulk delete profiles by clicking this checkbox, and here we select Delete. Here we also have various settings that you can familiarize yourself with. And a bit later, the Cloud Profiles feature will be implemented. We'll be able to launch profiles on different devices, provided that ZennoBrowser is installed under the same license on different devices. That is, we'll be able to launch the same profiles on different computers. One more point about mobile proxies. As I said earlier, some mobile proxies have a feature to change the IP address by making a request to a link. Now I'll show you how to quickly change the IP address. Let's create a profile. We'll set a proxy here, and here we'll enter some link. Let's add the profile. And after we finish working with the profile, to quickly change our proxy's IP address, we just need to hover the mouse over this icon, click on it, and the IP address of our mobile proxy will be changed. That's all for now. See you in the next video.